I call the Honourable Minister, Christopher Finlayson. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe. Thank you, sir. I acknowledge the people of Ngati Apa ki te rātou, Ngati Kuia and the Rangitane o Wairau, especially those who have travelled here today from Te Tauihu and are here in Parliament to witness the third reading of their settlement legislation. Mr Speaker, these are iwi who share common descent from the Kurahaupo waka. They have lived across the top of the South Island for many, many generations. They have preserved their identities despite the odds, despite the actions of the Crown, and despite external forces. My good friend Mr Henare mentioned in the previous debate the importance of New Zealand history. People need to know what happened. Now, as sure as anything, I'm going to receive some sour emails today from various lovely people after the conclusion of these debates. And I will go back to them politely, because that's my style, but in a very determined way to tell them to read the history, because there's nothing like knowing the facts. The facts are that in the 1820s and 1830s, iwi from the North Island invaded and settled in the northern South Island. And although Ngati Apa, Ngati Kuia and Rangitane no longer had exclusive possession of all their territory, they retained their tribal structures, their chiefly lines and ancestral connections to the land. In 1840, the great Rangitane chief, Vihaya Kaikoura, signed the Treaty of Waitangi near Port Underwood. But the history of the Crown's relationship with these iwi since 1840 is one of consistent failure adequately to investigate and appropriately recognise the rights of these iwi at relevant times. I too was going to give what could only have been a potted summary of the history, but I think Mr Tarakatni's done a very good job in that regard, and so I'm not going to repeat what he said here, simply endorse it. But one thing I do want to say something about is the South Island Landless Natives Reserves Act. Because after all this history of wrongdoing, after all this unfairness, the Crown attempted to alleviate the position of these iwi through the provision of landless native reserves. The reserves were, however, in isolated locations. They were of poor quality and were generally unable to be developed for effective economic use. So Ngati Apa were allocated land on the west coast. Rangitane and Ngati Kuia were allocated land on Stewart Island, Rakiura, a great distance away from their traditional rohe, and it was all landlocked. The Crown never granted members of those iwi titles to the land. The Tribunal has described the failure to provide land to landless Māori as a cruel hoax. Well, I agree with the Tribunal, and I say that the Silna lands were and are a sick joke, and they need to be resolved. I might add, not for want of trying on my part, but as long as I hold a warrant in this portfolio, I will continue to push for resolution of this issue, and Mr Bradley knows that it's long overdue and it's time that the matter was resolved. So I give you, on behalf of the Crown, that undertaking that I am going to continue to work on that matter, because it is long past time that this blot on the South Island history was resolved. The Ngati Apa settlement would not have been possible without the perseverance of Ngati Apa ki te rātou ki te Waiponamu Trust. They spearheaded negotiations on behalf of their iwi. I acknowledge in particular Peter Mason, the principal negotiator, Brendan Wilson, who was the chair for many, many years, and Paeariwaka Herbert. These are just a few of the people who represented this great iwi during this process, and they deserve public recognition for their hard work. I particularly want to mention a wonderful, wonderful woman this morning. Her name was Kath Hemi. She led the charge in the tribunal, and it's so very sad that she did not get to see this day. In fact, she wasn't at the Ngati Apa signing, but I was really pleased to be able to take her the deed of settlement when she was in Wairau Hospital for her signature, and I'm sure that she and her family were very pleased that that was able to happen. She now rests near Omaka Marae, and she may be gone from this world, but she will always be remembered for her courage and her tenacity. I want to say something about Ngati Kuia. Te Runanga o Ngati Kuia Charitable Trust, through their hard work and perseverance, made this settlement possible, and we signed the deed of settlement on Labour Weekend 2010, and that was a great day. I acknowledge Mark Moses, Raymond Smith, Wairau Joe Mason. They represented Ngati Kuia in the settlement process, and I really do praise their commitment and their dedication to Ngati Kuia, which warrants mention today. And I believe that their trust will lead this iwi into a very positive post-settlement era. Let me say something about Rangitane. The Wairau Bar and the boulder bank within the Rangitane Rohe is considered by archaeologists to be one of the most important archaeological sites in the country. Exercising a kaitiaki role, Rangitane o Wairau stopped the destruction of this site, which continues to unearth, to reveal important information about our past. Through Rangitane o Wairau's collaboration with archaeologists, we're learning more and more about a place that may have been the first landing site of Pacific peoples on these shores. Through this settlement, the Crown aims to recognise the cultural association that Rangitane has in Te Tauihu. And I want to say how much I appreciated being invited down to the bar some years ago when some of the ko-iwi, I should say, were reinterred. And I always remember that there's no such thing as a free lunch, because Mr. Bradley gave me a shovel and told me that I should do some work as well. I want to recognise those who have championed the work of this great iwi, leading up to the time when we signed the deed of settlement in Blenheim on 4 December 2010. Joe Tukapua, Frank MacDonald, Ruanui MacDonald, Amira Hines, Joe Congdon, Mervyn Sadd, John Bradley, Gary Waipahana. These people have worked so very long and hard on behalf of their iwi, and I acknowledge them. I acknowledge in particular the efforts of that wonderful, optimistic and warm human being, Richard Bradley, Judith MacDonald and Geoffrey Hines. He wanted me to say that. I commend the trust as they champion Rangitane's interests into the future. So, Mr. Speaker, these are three very important settlements, and it's a sign of the generosity of these people that they were prepared, in the interests of getting the third reading, to have the three settlements read together, and once again I thank you for that. Congratulations on reaching this significant milestone. It has been a long haul, but I'm very relieved that we've now reached the stage of a third reading. Finally, I want to pick up on something that Mr. Tirakatini said in closing and utterly endorse it. I acknowledge the presence in the gallery of Sir Mark Solomon of Ngāi Tahu, and I very much look forward to working with all the iwi of the South Island as they promote their interests into the future. It's great that he's here, and I recall his words when Rangitane signed their deed of settlement with the Crown together. We can do so much, and I heartily endorse that. Whether in fact you'll take over the world, as Mr. Tirakatini said, well, a little bit of hyperbole is permitted, but you're certainly going to be a fantastic force for good, for economic strength in the South Island, and I endorse what Sir Mark has said. So with those few words, one can never say enough in a third reading speech. I thank the representatives of the three iwi and wish them all the very best for the future.
The Honourable Nanaia Mahuta.